Greetings, Guardians, from Purdue University. I'm Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Alex Terry, and today I'll be briefing you on Chapter 4 of the United States Space Doctrine, Employment of Space Forces. As an overview, we're going to cover the Cornerstone Responsibilities, the core competencies, command and control, and how to be stewards of the space domain. Now, I'm going to go over this quote said by Major General Bernard Schriever, and I want you to think about it as we go through this briefing. In the long haul, our safety as a nation may depend on our achieving space superiority. Several decades from now, the important battles may not be sea battles or air battles, but space battles. And we should be spending a certain fraction of our national resources to ensure that we do not lag in obtaining space supremacy. Now, that quote is as true as it is today as it was back in 1957. Now we're going to get into the Cornerstone Responsibilities. We're going to go into preserving freedom of action, enable lethality and effectiveness, and then into providing independent options for the joint force. So going into the Cornerstone Responsibilities, we have preserving freedom of action. So what does this mean as the Space Force? So the Space Force is here to protect access to and freedom to operate in space for all. So getting access to space and having space supremacy accomplishes all components of national power of DIME. If you remember in my last chapter briefing, you know what DIME stands for: diplomatic, information, military, and economic power. And lastly, military space forces will protect, defend, and preserve freedom of action. And that'll help us maintain the strategic perspective of being the all-seeing eye in space. Now let's get into a little bit of what this actually means. So over here on the far left, we have space parity. This is when no force has an advantage or disadvantage. Both forces have the exact same strengths and weaknesses. Moving on to space superiority, this is where one side, on this side, the blue side, can restrict the red side's ability to operate in space, air, or land. And this also restricts their freedom of action, putting them on edge. Lastly, we have space supremacy. This is where one side, the blue side, controls all of space, and the red side is left at the blue side's will. Now, this is not always desirable as space operators. Sometimes we want our enemies to have access to certain lines of communication, such as medical lines of communication or liaison communications, so we can talk to them for peace talks. Now moving on to joint lethality and effectiveness. So the Space Force needs to be a space-smart joint force. We cannot all be independent, we have to work together. So the Space Force will work on rapid dissemination of information, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We will have the ability for precision attack, strategic warning, and global power projection. So space has to be integrated into joint training, planning, and operations. The Space Force is not independent. We must work with all other branches of the military if we want to achieve our national power and DIME. Next, we're going to go into providing independent options for the joint force. So as the Space Force, we must protect space in, from, and to the space domain. So military space power makes deterrence credible. We keep our enemies accountable. We do this by detecting any malevolent action, providing a national technical means for arms control, and enabling lethality and non-lethal effects against terrestrial targets. So we keep our enemies, make sure they're in check, make sure they're actually doing what they say they're doing. Next, space power strengthens our alliances and military partnerships. So we do this through a lot of different ways. So we have collaboration and cooperation. The Space Force did sign multiple memorandums of understandings to other countries, and we're trying to work together with them. We are trying to encourage our allies to support U.S. objectives, and we can use that through our space power. The Space Force makes deterrence credible and effective, as discussed in the last slide, and we reinforce confidence in our partners that we have the capabilities in space, in the air, and on land and on sea. Next, we're going to get into the Cornerstone Responsibilities. Here we have the employment conditions for the Space Force. So our assets are based on a broad portfolio and capabilities on the systems. So what does this really mean? Our systems have to be optimized for performance and longevity. We cannot just launch a satellite and expect it to live for only 1 year and have it land back in the ocean. We are here for a long time, and our systems must be here for a long time. Next, our systems must be purpose-built and they need the capability to be repurposed for new objectives. So we cannot, like I just said, we cannot just build satellites one-time usage. We have to be able to reuse them, and they must have a specific purpose. Here we have the X-37B orbital test vehicle. This vehicle was purposely designed to test future spacecraft for the military, and it'll play a pivotal role in putting military space personnel in space in the future. Next, we're going to get into core competencies. So this is how our space power is employed, why we are here, really. So we're going to go over space security, combat power projection, space mobility and logistics, information mobility, and then space domain awareness. Next, we're going to get into the space security. So the Space Force is here to establish safe and secure access to the space domain. How we do this is through self-protection capabilities. How do we protect our satellites and our assets in space? Anomaly and resolution support. How do we fix our satellites that are broken down in space? Maneuver deconfliction. What happens if our satellites are on a crash course for another satellite? Protecting lines of communication. How do we communicate across the globe fast and efficiently? And then joint training and exercises. How does the Joint Force know we are here to help them? How can we better assist the military as a whole? Next, we're going to get into combat power projection. So, in essence, we're here to protect, defend, and defeat threats. We are a military branch, is what we're here to do. So we have defensive operations, offensive operations. Let's go into the defensive first. So we have active defensive operations, such as destroying, nullifying, or reducing threats in space. This may entail reactive capabilities, such as if an enemy launches a rocket at us or a missile, how do we protect against that in space? We have passive defensive operations, such as system hardening and emission security. How do we protect our satellite from being hacked into, and how do we protect them in the environment of space? Next, we have offensive operations, which consist of neutralizing the adversary, terrestrial space, and the cyber domain. So we're not just focused in space, we're focused on all domains. And lastly, we target space system architecture. So we have the nodes and the satellites themselves. How do we attack those and destroy the enemy? Next, we have space mobility and logistics. Now, this facilitates the movement and support of military equipment and personnel into, from, and through the space domain. What does this really mean? So it's orbital sustainment and recovery. How do we go from engineering the rocket to launching the rocket and to recovering whatever we had in space? So this will consist of inspection of spacecraft and military personnel going into space, anomaly resolution, which is how do we fix our spacecraft into space, and any upgrades that we could potentially have in the future. Next, information mobility. As I said earlier, the Space Force is a rapid information disseminating machine. We have to be very quick in the information that we get. So this means we have a reliable collection and transportation of data. So this data will consist of missile warning, communications, nuclear detonation detection, and ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And these communications and our systems must be planned, integrated, and tailored to fight our missions, whatever they may be. Next, we have space domain awareness. So this is the identification, characterization, and understanding of any factor pertaining to the space domain. So we have three different dimensions that we will go into. The physical, which is the spacecraft and systems itself. The network, the links and nodes that connect satellites and the ground crews. And lastly, cognitive dimensions. What is the decision-making process and the psychological tendencies of you and the adversary that you're up against? So we're going to look at this figure here. This kind of breaks down what we just talked about. How would you or your adversary react if you're getting jammed? First of all, you may not even know your satellite is being jammed at all. You may think it just got destroyed. How are you going to react if your satellite is potentially gone and blown up into 1,000 pieces? Where are the links and nodes? What happened to those? Why can you not access your satellite? And how are you going to react? And how is your adversary thinking that you're going to react upon this discovery? This all plays into the space domain awareness. Next, we're going to go into command and control. How you should act as a Space Force officer or an operations officer when you're a flight commander. So as a commander, you will have the exercise of authority and direction. by your commander. So what does this really mean, and how do we be the best space officers that we can be? First, we have delegation. You're going to be given a lot of tasks as a guardian and as an officer. You have to know how to facilitate those tasks through your chain of command. You cannot be able to do everything at once. You have to delegate it to your team. Next, we have timely judgments. As I said, the Space Force is a rapidly evolving military branch, so we are very quick on our feet. A few second delays could cause lives across the world and in space, so you have to make judgments very quickly and within seconds. Next, we have communication of intent. When you get assigned a team, you need to let them know why they're there. What is your goals as a commander, and what is your commander's goals? Next, we have tactical level of initiative. The Space Force is small for a reason. We need to handle our problems at the lowest echelon possible. We cannot let the bureaucracy of the military get in our way. We have to handle our problems at the lowest level as possible. Next, the Space Force, especially as a Space Force officer, you will have a team of teams. And we'll get into this on the next slide. Yes, we will be specialized in our career field, but you will be a manager and an overseer of multiple teams, and you have to work each person's strengths and weaknesses together. And how do those teams operate together? That's up to you to decide. Lastly, we have defined authorities, roles, and relationships. This plays into delegation, communication of intent, and tactical level of initiative. So when you're assigned a team, you need to define those authorities, who's in charge, the roles of your team, why they're actually there, and the relationships between the team, and how they relate to the Space Force. What are you doing to accomplish the mission? As I said, we're going to get into why a commander has to have these skills. This is what a typical space operations office looks like. You can see it's very busy. Here in the center we have the command center, which is where the commander usually stays. And you can see there's multiple cubicles all around. Those are teams. So as I said earlier, you will have a team of teams, and it's your responsibility to oversee everybody here and make sure the mission goes as planned. So you must be well thought out, make sure your teams are operating as they should be, as discussed on the last slide. Lastly, we have stewards of the domain. Military space forces will promote responsibility norms of behavior for the space domain. We are on the forefront of this domain, so we must set the example for the rest of the world. All space operators and guardians will perpetuate space as a safe and open environment for all. We are not here to take space for ourselves. We're here on behalf of the entire world, and we must protect it at all costs. So space operators will act in accordance with international law, the Outer Space Treaty, laws of armed conflict, and the United States government and Department of Defense policy, as well as any other future space treaties and laws that may come in act in the future. As a summary, I went over the Cornerstone Responsibilities of the Space Force, the core competencies, command and control, how to be a good space commander, and then how to be proper stewards of the space domain. This concludes my briefing. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Purdue Space Team, and we'll get back with you with an answer. Thank you.